almost goodbye. Thanks for making it to the end of this really long beatboxer's guide. I appreciate the dedication. Anyways, in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the learning outcomes that I think you should have by now, some questions that I think you should be able to answer, and also some ideas and thoughts about how you can continue to grow after this guide. Now for all of this, I have a little presentation. Basically, I'm just going to go over each section of the guide and then give you some questions to think about that you should be able to answer already, and then I'll go through the answers with you. So first, we talked about beatboxing, basically using your mouth and lips and tongue in order to imitate drum and percussion sounds, and VP stands for vocal percussion or vocal percussionist. A VP is very important on your a cappella team because they're kind of like the backbone of the team and they keep everyone in sync. You're not really a soloist when you're an a cappella beatboxer, unless you get a little solo somewhere, but your role is more so to just be loud and clear and consistent and balanced with the group. So that means that a cappella beatboxing is usually easier to achieve for beginners since you don't really need to make all these complicated sounds to be able to help your team. The three fundamental principles of beatboxing are volume, clarity, and consistency, and they apply to every sound that you make as a beatboxer. So volume, we talked about pressure, how you can generate pressure from different parts of your mouth, and then we talked about clarity, which is cutting out breathiness and cutting out extra sounds and vowels and vocalizations and trying to basically focus on those short, distinct consonants. And then consistency, which is all about sticking to the same tempo, the same tone, and then making sure that you can breathe consistently without any disruptions. The cake analogy was about diaphragmatic pressure and how it's kind of like the frosting on a cake. You need to know how to make that basic cake first, and that's your mouth and lip pressure. And then depending on the type of cake, maybe it'll benefit from some frosting. Some cakes don't need frosting, some cakes do need some frosting, and every cake can be spoiled if you add too much frosting. So you really have to know when to add it and how much. This is different from singing because with singing, that frosting is more like the main dish. You need to have that diaphragmatic support all the time when you're singing, but it's not as important when you're beatboxing. You can take all three of these principles and then apply them to boots and cats to make them a interesting beat just by making them louder and clearer and more consistent. The basic beatboxing kit. We talked about the 5 different parts of a drum kit, which are the kick drum, the hi-hat, the snare, toms, and cymbals. And then for this video, we focused on just the kick drum, the hi-hat, and the outward K snare. And those are the 3 sounds that make up the basic boots and cats rhythm. And the difference between a mouth sound and a diaphragm-assisted sound is a mouth sound is something that's made purely with the mouth, but a diaphragm-assisted sound is a mouth sound that can benefit from some diaphragm assistance, or in other words, just a little bit of breath. So we talked about the outward K snare. That's one of those diaphragm-assisted sounds, whereas the bass kick and the hi-hat are more of those mouth sounds where you don't really want to add any extra frosting because it might just make things sound really breathy or make you lose control. Then we talked about the basic practice routine, and I gave you those 4 basic beats to work on as well as the specific BPMs to work on them with, and then also explain how you can use a metronome and how you can breathe through your teeth in order to make things consistent but to still make it sound like beatboxing. The main difference between beat 3 and the other ones is that beat 3 is in 3/4 time, so it has 3 beats per bar, whereas the other 3 beats, this is kind of confusing, but the other 3 patterns, I can call them, were all in 4/4, meaning that they had 4 beats per bar. When you're doing these exercises, you should be able to do them without stopping to take a breath. So basically infinitely. And then if you feel like you have either too much or too little air, then you should adjust and either release some more air, especially on those diaphragm assisted sounds, or cut back on the air, especially on those mouth sounds. And then while you're practicing, you should also try to take some videos of yourself and critique yourself based on those 3 fundamental principles. Ask yourself, am I being loud? Am I being clear? And am I being consistent? And then also try to ask around for help from other beatboxers if you can. With the full beatboxing kit, we talked about all those other sounds, so including the toms and the cymbals, as well as those extra sounds for the parts of the drum kit that we already talked about, as well as those auxiliary sounds. So those are the ones that you can't really replicate on a drum kit, but they're just useful to have. And then, yeah, basically just go through all those sounds and think about which ones were diaphragm assisted or not, which ones were easy for you, which ones weren't, and then practice accordingly. Then we got into the full practice routine. Again, those same 4 beats, but just those higher BPMs. And for pattern 3, we're now tripling that frequency so that you can get it to be faster. And then make sure that you are practicing both speeding up the sounds that you already know, and then learning some new sounds. And when you learn those new sounds, put them into the same beats, but just make sure you're slowing down enough so that they're actually loud and clear and consistent. Don't rush the process at all. Then we had breathing strategies. The 2 main breathing strategies are to either breathe during a rest or in between notes. And when you do that, you should try to breathe silently. Or you can actually use the breath as a sound itself. So try it on some inward sounds. Either you can just breathe normally like a, or you can actually do a sound like a or a and actually mix it into some other sound from the drum kit. And in that case, when you're doing method 2, then you should actually make the breath kind of audible. When you're beatboxing, your breath level should not vary too much. It should stay at relatively the same level. So there's that exercise that I mentioned in the video, which you can do. And then the robot analogy from the video is basically if you were a robot that was beatboxing, then you wouldn't really need very big lungs. But the reason why you need big lungs is because you're a human being that's living and breathing and you have to move your body. So just keep track of how much breath you need for that, but realize that you don't need a lot of breath to actually do the beatboxing part. Then how to expand your kit without learning new sounds. So we talked about 4 different methods. First, taking sounds and changing them from outwards to inwards, or even vice versa. So we already saw how you could take the t and turn it into a t on the way in. You can also shape your vocal tract differently. So for example, rounding off your mouth and then making that K snare a lot darker. You could also combine and add letters and sounds that you already know from your alphabet or from other languages. So for instance, we talked about how you can combine the t and r and sh in order to get sh. And you can also take the letter J or the letter kh from the Arabic language or whatever else you know how to do. And then the 4th thing, you can experiment with dynamics. So you can take some sounds and just make them either louder or softer. So for example, with a PF snare. Or you can just use different sounds at different times depending on what sort of dynamic you need. So maybe if you're going for something softer, you can do a certain sound. And when you're going louder, you can do a different sound. It's important to know how to do this and how to expand your kit without learning new sounds, because it'll get you a much wider expressive range for much less effort than trying to learn new sounds all the time. And plus, if you're learning way too many sounds all at once, then you're not really going to master any of them. So it's better that you can have just a simple kit, but really know how to work your way around it. Okay, and then beatboxing along to songs. So can you take a song and then mentally deconstruct all the different parts of the drum kit and percussion that are in the song, and then convert it into parts of your beatboxing kit? Can you do that all either on paper, or can you do it in your mind? And then can you use this to actually beatbox along to a song? It's really useful to be able to do this, because then you can learn a lot of new patterns, much more and many more examples than you would get from just looking up beatbox tutorials online all the time. It's also a good idea to build yourself a fixed drum kit when you're covering a song, so that you're not just adding sounds willy-nilly, so you can keep things sounding more consistent. And it also mimics what an actual drummer would do during a song. They don't usually switch their drum kit during a song, but between songs they might. If there's no percussion in the original song, then it's really up to you what you want to do. You could try adding some softer sounds or some louder sounds, or maybe nothing at all. And if you don't do any beatboxing, then it might actually accentuate when you do hop in with the beatboxing. So don't feel bad about sometimes not beatboxing for a song or for certain parts of a song. holding the microphone. So we talked about how you should hold your microphone really close to your mouth when you're beatboxing, and that's to make sure that you can emphasize those bass sounds, those percussive sounds that you really don't want to hear when you're singing. And the direction of holding your microphone depends on your microphone, but for that Shure microphone that I was showing in the video, it's top sensitive, so you sing into it like that. That's probably common for most Acappella or beatboxing or karaoke microphones. And then in terms of spit, you're probably going to make a lot of spit when you're first learning new sounds, and that's okay. Once you master them, you'll get a lot less spit. But sometimes even after a lot of practice, you'll still get some spit every now and then, and that's okay. It's natural. And then finally, we talked about writing a beatbox arrangement in MuseScore. So we talked about those 3 things that you should be telling your arranger. Number 1, write the part as if there was going to be a drummer, and then I'll figure out how to beatbox it. Then tell them not to make it too complicated because it's not the same on a drum kit versus with your mouth. There are some things that you can't really do with your mouth. And then third of all, let you edit the file and to add your own lyrics, because that's going to help you differentiate between the different sounds. Then in the video, we talked about how you can add a 5-piece drum kit and various drum sounds into MuseScore. And then we also showed how there are usually 2 voices in MuseScore and how you can force everything to be in one voice so that it's much easier to work with. All drum pieces are not possible to do as a beatboxer because, for example, you can't do a bass kick and a snare at the same time. But you can do it at the same time on a drum because you have your feet and your hands. That's okay. You can probably get your beatboxing to be pretty representative to a pretty good extent. It just might not sound 100% the same, but you can get the general gist of it. And then in MuseScore, you can add 2 different types of text. So that's lyrics and then just general text. And both of those are going to help you know what to do when you're beatboxing. Those lyrics, you can use the notation that we've learned in this guide, and then you know what sounds to make. And then with that text, you can specify other things like tone or maybe some other types of sounds that you can't really represent with the normal beatbox or drum notation. All right, and if you're not sure about the answers to any of these questions, then review the relevant video. It's okay if you didn't get everything right away. Sometimes it just takes some practice. Wow, so that brings us to the end of the guide and discussing about what you can do moving onwards. It's pretty crazy that you've made it this far, so really give yourselves a pat on the back. And now you're at a point where you can try experimenting and just researching on your own. So experiment with the same song and trying out different beats, making your own beats and not just following the original, learning how to freestyle on some different songs. That can make you a lot more flexible as a beatboxer. And then also learning and exploring some other types of beats, the same way that you might listen to different genres of music to learn how to sing them. Listen to different genres of music so that you know how to beatbox along to them. So try trap beats or reggae beats or rock beats or pop beats, whatever you're interested in. And then you can also expand your kit whenever you're comfortable and just do whatever you're interested in. Find a sound that you think is cool and, hey, I want to learn that. So some recommended intermediate sounds that I think you should do would be an inward K snare. So that's like this. I'll try and add a video somewhere in the guide. And then also a lip roll. But yeah, just finding whatever sounds cool to you, honestly, and just learning it and adding it into your beatboxing. Okay, so that's it for me, honestly. So thanks for listening. I hope you've learned a lot. And it will take you a lot of practice to get it down. By this point, you probably just watched this video, but you haven't been practicing for that long. So keep practicing. It's going to take months. It's going to take some hard months, maybe years. Who knows? But as long as you're consistent with it, that's what really matters. So make sure you're practicing regularly, and I'm sure you'll be able to impress all of your fellow non-beatboxers soon, as long as you don't spit on them too much.
I'm high, I'm from outer space. I got monkey with my blood, evolution in my veins. I'm gone, I've been far away. I'm a luminary now, making moves on me. I've been dreaming of a flying for a long time. Had a vision from the grids and want a cosign. Artificially intelligent AI. I'm your future, present, undefined. I am a missing link of this solution. I am not really I don't swim or sink, I just float. I don't need gravity, I just need oh.